Check 1 2 1 2. So the other day I made a video talking about the rising supply and fading demand of retro video games. And that video got a lot of feedback. I got a lot of commentary from a lot of people who, felt strongly about that. And that happens every time someone mentions the decline in retro or the fading of interest in retro. You get a lot of polarized views on that. On one side of the fence, you have people who will swear up and down that retro has never been stronger than ever. They'll swear that now is the best time, more people are getting into retro. And then you have the other side of the fence of people who say retro is dead, emulation is the future. You have a lot of people that are just straight up giving up on retro video games altogether, and they're only doing modern gaming consoles. There's all sorts of views on this topic, and I think as time goes on, it will continue to become more and more polarized. But I think one of the reasons for the great divide when it comes to this topic is because I think people are confusing hype with interest, right? When I started that video off, I said that the hype, retro gaming hype, is dead. But it doesn't mean that there's zero interest or that the interest in the hobby or that there's no interest in retro games. And I think, when someone hears that the hype is dead, they automatically think that no one cares about retro, that it's become a thing of the past. And I don't think that interest in retro video games will ever die. I don't think that, there will come a point where no one cares about retro video games and retro video games go back to being 50 cents or $1 a piece. I don't think we're ever going to see those days again. But I do think that the mass hype around the hobby is dead. And I'm going to talk about that here in this video. Now, during the height, right? During the height of the hype, the heights of the hype, you saw 1,000,001 videos around games like Pokemon Gale of Darkness, Rule of Rose, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. You saw 1,000,001 videos talking about all the different Pokemon games. And during that time, there was a lot of money to be made in retro video games, the same way you see in Pokemon cards today. And so a lot of the people who were watching these channels, especially these reseller channels or these retro gaming YouTube channels or these channels that talked about pickups, you had a lot of speculative hobbyists who were watching these videos so that they could understand which games were valuable and which games weren't, so that they too can get in on the retro video game craze or the retro video game hype. Here in 2025, and I think I said this in that video, here in 2025, most people know what games are the games to look for. Most people know what games are the valuable games because there's been thousands and thousands, if not millions of videos made on the same subjects, talking about the same games. So at this stage of the game, if you're a speculative retro gaming hobbyist, there's really not much more at this stage that you're going to learn from watching a pickups video, because you've seen so many pickups videos that highlight probably the same few hundred games that there's really no benefit to someone who's on the fringes or on the outskirts of the hobby. And so I think in losing those folks and losing the fringe folks, they are the ones that make up a good segment of the hype. They're the hype folks. And I think that we've seen a falling away of that group. Now, Iowa Retro Gamer Dad put out a short the other day. And in the short, he said he noticed that retro gaming content creators or video game content creators, he said that he noticed that there was a decrease and a decline in viewership. And I think that, yeah, you're going to see that. When hype around a topic dies, you're going to see less interest. Less people are going to want to watch. Less people are going to be engaged. But you are always going to have that core group of people that are interested in retro video games, in retro game pickups, in collection videos and things of that nature. In fact, there are a lot of new YouTube channels today that are growing every day. Um, you have a channel like Easy Gamers, who I think he recently just hit 1,000 subscribers, and his channel is growing. And all he does is video game pickup videos. He just does pickup videos. But his channel's growing because there is still that conglomerate. There is still those group of individuals who are still interested in video game pickups. There are still folks who are interested in that type of content. Now, obviously, every content creator puts their own spin on it. They have their own style, they have their own charisma, they have their own feel that they put to it. And I think overall, when you look at someone who has a growing subscriber base, 9 times out of 10, people are kind of falling in love more so with the content creator than the content. They like the delivery style. They could probably get the same information or watch anybody else, but usually they're subscribing because they like the way the content is delivered, right? And so I get what he's saying, because in Iowa Retro Gamer Dad's video, he asked if the interest in retro games is dead, and I say no. I don't think the interest is dead, but I do think the hype is dead, right? And so I think if you are a content creator who was trying to feed into the hype and you didn't genuinely have a passion for retro games and you didn't like to play them, and it didn't just run deeper for you than YouTube, like if everything you did surrounding retro video games was to please a crowd on YouTube, then yeah, for you it's dead. Like the interest there is dead. Because you were doing it for the hype. But if you are a channel, or were a channel, that not only collected retro video games, but you shared stories, you talked about retro games, you talked about what they meant to you, you actually played retro games on live stream, or video games for that matter, I think it's a little bit different. And I think this is the post-hype era of retro video game collecting. Now, I'm always gonna get like 4 or 5 dudes who come in the comments and they're like, bro, this isn't new. Retro game collecting's been around for 20 years and I've been doing it for 40 years. And we have all these, retro gaming scholars who earned their PhD somewhere on how exactly to collect and talk about video games. You can save all that jazz, right? There's no school on this. It's all subjective and it's all perspective based, and we're all gonna have our different opinions on video games. Anyone can go to Wikipedia and look up the stats and history on a game and tell you when it came out and who the developers were and who the music director was, and all that stuff doesn't really mean a lot to me, because I didn't grow up looking for that stuff. You do have some people who care about a lot of that stuff, and if you do, congrats to you. If you care about that to that degree, I care about it to some degree. Let me not say I don't care, because I care about it to the point where I know which companies typically make games that I like. I know Capcom makes games that I like. I know Konami makes games that I like. I know for this era of gaming, I know Merge Games makes games that I like. I know Red Art Games usually makes games that I like, or Pixel Heart Studios, Super Rare, right? I'm a fan of them. So I know the studios, certain studios, because I tend to buy the same games from the same studios, right? But my point in saying all this is that I think the community is going back to a place where probably more of like your hardcore gamers who have been in it for a really long time, they're probably going to regain the helm or retake the helm of the hobby. Now that a lot of the speculative collectors have moved away. And you're seeing that. You're seeing people move away from video games into Pokemon card collecting or comic book collecting or some other form of collecting. Me, I've always had a passion for retro video games before I even made a YouTube channel. So I'm not going to change now just because the hype is dead. The interest is still there. And I think that there's always going to be interest in the hobby. And if you, like any other topic, if you make good content around it, people will come around, they'll stick around, and they'll hear what you have to say and they'll want to participate in the discussion. But I don't think the interest in retro gaming as dead, but I do think the hype is dead. All of that hype, all that mass hysteria has now been absorbed by Pokemon trading cards and all that jazz. And I think that's where I think we're at. I think we are in a post hype era of retro game collecting. And I think this is great. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think this is a great time. This is probably one of the best times in the last 5 years to really dive into retro games. You know why? Because for the first time in years, right, you're able to actually find games without having to compete as hard depending on where you're at. I'm not saying there's no competition, because I know some people listen with all or nothing ears. Like some people don't know. It's like some people, it's either all or nothing. Like there's no middle ground. There's no gradient with some people. I'm not saying that there's zero competition. I'm saying there's less competition. When I can go online and pick up a copy of Fatal Frame 2 for $45, or Fatal Frame 3 for $35, or if I can pick up a copy of Chibi Robo for half the price it goes for, if I can do things like that, right, that tells me that, okay, the supply is coming back. And even if the demand dips a little bit, if supply is going up, it's good for collectors and people who are still genuinely interested in the hobby and have not just decided to jump on or off of the hype train. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think there's a difference between hype and interest, or is it all the same to you? If someone says the hype is dead, you take it as no one cares about retro. I'm interested to know your thoughts on the difference between these two concepts. And I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.